Okay, it's the big one. It is the culmination of the last few months of the Opening Line podcast. And, well, it's all come down to this. Thanks for joining in again with Pinnacle, and thanks for downloading to all the episodes. If you have been listening intently and picking Eric's brains on the podcast throughout the NFL season. Now, we have got Eric eager, as ever, alongside me here on the podcast, PFF NFL data expert. We've also got another voice as well, because, you know, it's the Super Bowl. We thought we'd get somebody else in just to try and chew the fat, pick the numbers, maybe give a different little bit of perspective on things to Eric. We'll have to see. We'll see. But that man who we've got alongside Eric for this week is Adam Chernoff, who is the senior NFL strategist at Covers. Welcome along, Adam. Thanks for coming along and being part of Pinnacle. Now, we were just talking off air a moment ago, and this Super Bowl one, for you, it's not really the best episode for you to make your debut, is it?
No, I mean, it would have been phenomenal if it was San Francisco, Cincinnati, and how that would have played out. As like the way that the numbers were initially early posted in the market, I would have had enormous value showing on San Francisco. But unfortunately, we're kind of at what I think is the right number on the side for this one. So still a great game to talk about, but a little bit sad we didn't get that betting opportunity with the Niners.
Well, there we go. Is that a sentiment that you echo, Eric, actually, in many ways?
Yeah, I think for the Super Bowl is all about the alternative markets, right? And trying to find, matchups that will dictate sort of an outcome that can be fat tail. I think that's a big part of this game. Early on, and I noticed, with Pinnacle, it was this way as well. But it's like, a lot of those numbers move right away, and then they sort of sit in place for 10 straight days. And we're sort of talking about the same numbers over and over. So, if you got out ahead and got some good numbers, on Sunday night, Monday or Tuesday, good on you. But after that, it's sort of going to be, I think, in my opinion, whether you're looking at alt spreads or props and things like that, that's kind of the place, in my estimation, that you have to go with the Super Bowl after the first couple of days.
So this is, and you quite rightly pointed towards Pinnacle's odds, actually, Eric, there. You can get them all, pinnacle.com. Los Angeles Rams against the Cincinnati Bengals. The full odds are on there. Every little bit of betting that you can imagine is over on the website. So do go check that out. Unless you're driving, obviously, then don't bother. But if you're on the tube or you just sat down, feel free to go and check those out whilst you're listening along to the podcast. And play some bets. Why not? First of all, just want to pick your brains on the championship games. Bengals defeating the Chiefs, Rams defeating the 49ers. I mean, quite generally, what have you made of the whole playoff campaign this year? Has it really taught us anything going into this Super Bowl? And also, any thoughts for maybe next season, if it's not too early to talk about that? I'll start with you, Eric.
Yeah, I think the playoffs, uncovered the fact that maybe after Buffalo and maybe after Green Bay, there weren't really that many good teams. And I don't even think Green Bay ultimately was a complete enough team to get it all the way there. And you looked at, Kansas City was, the team that was, I think, most the highest probability of being able to take over a tournament where there weren't that many like elite teams, or every team had flaws. And that manifested itself, right? When you look at the Rams beating the 49ers, it was a game where both teams made mistakes, and it was the team that took advantage of the last mistake, which was the Rams, that came out and won. And it was the team that squandered the Rams' mistakes, and the interception dropped by Jaquiski Tartt really moved that one. In Kansas City, Cincinnati, was Kansas City just, made mistakes in the second half offensively. And I don't think Cincinnati was brilliant. They only scored one touchdown on a drive that started in their own territory. But they ultimately just were able to step in when Kansas City didn't.
Yeah. Adam, is that the way you kind of saw it as well? I'm guessing it is.
Well, the problem is Eric's been too busy traveling and doing fancy media appearances all over the country this week. So I haven't got like the full in-depth analysis to what happened at the game he was at with Cincinnati, Kansas City, because my problem is I'm not watching the games in the PFF studios where you get all the views and the grading and everything. And so I only see what's happening on the broadcast. And to me, that Chiefs collapse in the second half was one of the more unexplainable things that we've seen over the course of the entire NFL season. Not because there isn't like a reason, but I don't think we saw what the Bengals were doing defensively well enough, or had it like articulated to us on the broadcast while it was happening, to know what changed between the first half and the second half. But then part of it too was like the one part of the Chiefs team that you didn't think was going to collapse. And you could maybe make the case that like that Chiefs offense, from like an entire unit perspective of the 64 offenses and defenses in the NFL that you wouldn't expect to collapse, was the one that broke down in just alarming fashion. So to me, that was a game that, just because of how it played out in the second half, there was a lot of questions that were never really answered that are kind of lingering. And like Eric said, the Bengals benefited from a lot of field position, but it's a Cincinnati team that they've been outgained every single playoff game so far. And during the regular season, that would lead to a very different betting scenario, but the Rams in their own right have some concerns too. So it was a weird conference championship weekend.
Well, first of all, I want to pick up on your point that you just got to watch the broadcast like the rest of us. So that's good that you're offering that perspective. And also you refer to Eric doing all the media stuff. Only the best insight here on Pinnacle. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm saying. The guy,
he's a mogul. It's unstoppable.
We love it, and we're glad to have him as well. We're truly. Okay, right. We're just gonna have a look at. I mean, also on that. So, were there any like intriguing plays that you guys saw? I mean, you talked about the whole everything, right? But is there anything that you saw that we could see again at the Super Bowl from either of the two sides that won the respective championships, Adam?
Not at the Super Bowl, but we need to talk about the punt.
Right, okay.
I think that's the most intriguing play that there was. And sure, you might not pick it up, but it's hard to ignore how the game switched off of that punt. But I mean, there was that. There was... I think the entire Chiefs play calling in the second half, and there's been a lot of weird second half play calling tendencies from coaches over the course of the playoffs. But the first 10 plays of that second half for the Chiefs were running back orientated plays on early downs. Like, why was that? If the Bengals were dropping everyone back in the coverage and it was this huge change, like what happened to the success from those plays that the Chiefs had so much with over the course of the last 4 or 5 weeks of the regular season and into the playoffs, where that was kind of how teams were playing them? Like what was going on there? So like that entire second half of plays was intriguing. And then the 49ers and Shanahan in the fourth quarter was intriguing too.
Yeah,
I think even the play where Kansas City decided to go for a touchdown at the end of the first half instead of
there you go,
kick a field goal. Obviously those points would have been important. That being said, like the Chiefs in the first half of that game, they gained all but one available yard to them, right? They scored 3 touchdowns and then they went all the way to the 1 yard line and missed. And so, as Adam said, the second half was truly bizarre in that it was one of those where they went from being unstoppable in the first half. And then the Bengals, a really big gamble is what the Bengals did, right? Because they rushed 3, played 8 in coverage, and basically said, look, we'll dare you to make one patient 70-yard drive, because if the way the second half played out, the Bengals didn't even score a point in the second half till 3 minutes left in the third quarter. So it wasn't like the Chiefs defense was collapsing or anything like that. It was honest to goodness, like the Bengals had 11 points to make up and they exactly made those up. And that's kind of what, and expected from an offense and the other teams, when your defense is playing great. But the Bengals defense said, look, we hope we're going to dare you to go 70 yards and score a touchdown on us. If the Chiefs would have done that at any point in the second half, including the last drive of regulation, that game's over. That game's won. Kansas City's in the Super Bowl. And it was a very crazy gamble given how unsuccessful that strategy was in the first half. But the Bengals pulled it off, and the Chiefs didn't even cross the 50-yard line in the second half until the final drive of the game. So it was a very uncanny effort by the Chiefs. And, hopefully, for them moving forward, it sort of motivates them knowing that they aren't invincible and that there are teams that will beat them when they don't play well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, look, enough of these playoff games, right? Enough of the Chiefs, etc. Let's move on. Super Bowl 56 in LA, which is excellent. Looking forward to that. Okay, right. The Cincinnati Bengals were the 4th seed in the AFC. The LA Rams were the 4th seed in the NFC. It's the first time in Super Bowl history that both teams are fourth seed or lower. So make of that of what you will. There is something to be said, though, from that, or to learn from that, isn't there? I'm not quite sure what. Adam and Eric are the experts. They're going to take you sort of why that's the case and how have we ended up in this situation. I mean, obviously, we've heard all about the playoffs, but the fourth ranked teams in getting through, I mean, it's the first time ever it's happened. So it's not like it's a regular thing that this happens. Adam, tell me, try and work this one out for me, mate.
Well, so from a betting perspective,
yeah, exactly.
This first time I've ever thought that they were both fourth ranked seeds were when you just mentioned it, because to me, it's like the playoffs start and it's the power ratings for how we have the teams. And it's thinking about the point spreads and how they match up to each other. Like there's from a betting perspective, I don't think much of it.
Is there anything to learn from it?
I don't really have any insight into like why that happened or how it shook down. It's just kind of how the games ultimately played out. I'd say Cincinnati's the bigger surprise being here more so than the Rams themselves. But hearing that for the first time is interesting to me because it kind of caught me off guard. But for me, it's just the teams are ranked how I have them in my ratings, and that was it.
Yeah. Does it, I mean, is there something to learn from that though? You know, from next season, when players are, people are putting bets on, right? And they're looking and they're going, who am I going for here? Who am I trying to select? Which, you know, and they're looking at the ranking. You're best off looking at the power rankings as opposed to the standings, right? Is that what we're kind of learning from that?
Well,
yeah, I think so, because it's kind of random, is it not, for the seeding down the stretch, Eric?
Yeah, I mean, it is. It's very much dependent upon who you play. I mean, the Rams were a loss by the Cardinals away from not even winning their own division, right? Because in that Week 18 game, they lost to the Niners, and if the Cardinals would have won as 6.5-point favorites or so to the Seattle Seahawks, they would have won the division, right? So it's even random that way. But like those two games, like don't change our power rankings of the teams all that much when we look at handicap games. So you're right. There's another aspect of this, which I think is actually fundamental to the game of football, and one of the reasons why we saw Tom Brady retire this weekend. One of the reasons that the Patriots were so good and so consistent for year in, year out, there was one less game in the standings, and there was almost always one less game in the playoffs for them. The New England Patriots got the bye every single year from 2011 to 2018. And even like Kansas City, we look at and say, they melted down. They were the favorite coming out of the AFC in the playoffs. They were the first team in NFL history to play 3 home games in the playoffs because of the new format. So, variance is probably going to. It's interesting because, like, in some sense, when you lengthen the season, the variance should go down. But in another way, the favorites, obviously, like if you're a 70% favorite to win all 3 games, you're a 66% favorite to lose one of them, at least, right? Or, not at least, but you're a favorite to lose one of them. So, I think you're getting more variance because there's less of a privilege of being there's less of a structural privilege to being one of the great teams.
Rams were also the first team, I believe, to ever play 2 divisional opponents in the playoffs on their way to the Super Bowl as well, because that extra team brings in that extra element of familiarity too. So that's like an ongoing situation where those were both third games of the season against Arizona and against San Francisco that the Rams kind of benefited from in a way.
Yeah. Okay.
Very good point.
Nice. It all feeds in. Just in terms of actually looking at the game itself, Dan, the money line's kind of saying that Rams are the favourites. Home field advantage, of course, which is another thing that is completely weird. That's blown my mind this week in terms of it's come along like London buses in terms of actual teams having home field advantage in the Super Bowl. Never happened before until 3 years ago, and then 3 years in a row, which is, there you go. But Eric, why are the Rams favourites? Just tell me why they are. I mean, there's so many different reasons why you could go into it, but it's not just home field advantage, is it? That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, I don't even think you would make home field advantage that big in this game just because, last year was a weird year because both teams didn't get in until like Friday or Saturday. So the home field advantage of the Super Bowl was somewhat real, and all the people that could go to that game in Tampa Bay were like local hospital workers who are, you'd think of as Tampa Bay fans possibly. like the Super Bowl is going to have a much more neutral crowd feel. And so that's something to think about when we think about handicapping home field advantage. I mean, I would still put it probably, just for familiarity of the stadium and all that kind of stuff. I would put it, maybe a half a point. We make the game about we make the teams 3.4 points separate just in general power rankings. And then I think the number had moved out, and actually you're seeing some buyback on Cincinnati coming in this week. But I think one of the reasons you saw it go out to 4.5 was this matchup between the Bengals offensive line, which is not very good, and a very, very good defensive line by the Los Angeles Rams headed by Aaron Donald.
Yeah. Adam, yourself?
I'm right there. Another thing to think about too with the stadium familiarity, the Rams are actually the designated away team. So the Bengals get the Rams' usual locker room, and the Rams get bumped to the away team facilities within their own stadium. But like you see the ticket prices, Rams fans that are just casual fans going out to support the team, they're not spending $5,000 to $15,000 on tickets. These are corporate sold tickets that create a very neutral environment, as always is the case for Super Bowl. So I think home field here is very minimal. But like Eric said, when you look at the matchups within the game on the field, and you look at kind of the trajectory that both teams came in on, specifically Cincinnati, the betting market tends to be lower on teams when you see that like the advanced box score is kind of weighted against them despite them winning. And we've seen that 3 weeks in a row really with Cincinnati. So not as big of a impact from that perspective as you would see in like a regular season week to week basis, but still it's hard to ignore how the Rams have looked versus how the Bengals have looked. That I think like a true number here is just a touch higher than 3. And then you add in kind of that home element, but you also add in the trajectory, and it's pretty reasonable to get the 4 here, I think.
Okay. All right. I mean, it is a difficult one to call this. I've been poring over the numbers before jumping on this podcast with you guys and thinking, yeah, I've got absolutely no clue where the value is. So obviously try and help some of our Pinnacle punters try and find a bit of the value here. How crucial is the defensive line of the Rams against the Bengals offensive going to be? If you're a bettor, right, and you're looking at the odds on Pinnacle, how can you kind of factor that into your betting? Adam?
Wow, this is a perfect sort of back and forth for Eric with the PFF numbers here for Burrow, who under pressure, especially against the blitz, has done, I believe, exceptionally well among the top QBs in the league. But we saw against Tennessee, there was a case where he was sacked 9 times, but still had a relatively efficient day throwing the football. But to me, it's this matchup on the field, Bengals 30th in pass block win rate, Rams top in pass rush win rate. You obviously have a very big difference here. And in terms of the matchup that I think could most change the game, this is certainly it, because it's hard to ignore how big of a mismatch this is for what the Rams can do up front, especially in the interior of that line, versus any other matchup in the game. So I think it's enormous in terms of how important it is.
Eric, go on, hit us with it.
You have Joe Burrow this year, not quite as good under pressure. Most quarterbacks aren't. 8 yards per pass attempt though. That's a good number. And I think like it does come down to this. It comes down to, and I believe this is what the last Super Bowl came down to. If the Bengals acknowledge their mismatch on the line of scrimmage and throw the ball to their 3 wide receivers early, and those 3 wide receivers can win early in the route, they'll probably be okay offensively, because the Rams are a very top-heavy team on defense. They have Jalen Ramsey, who can take away 1 player. They're 3 of their front 4 guys are actually all 4 of their front 4 guys are great. Linebacker level, safety level is a little bit banged up and a little bit weaker. So if the Bengals go into the game and believe, our guys can block it up, we're fine, I think it's going to be a disaster. If they go into it and say, we need to make sure that everything is thrown quickly, we make yards after the catch with guys like Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, who is wonderful against the Chiefs, and Tyler Boyd, they should be okay. And on the other side of the ball, or both sides of the ball, to me, it's also just which team decides to run the football too much, because both teams in the championship round ran the ball on early downs way too often and put their quarterback in in long yard situations where it's just really hard to play quarterback in those situations. So I think the Bengals, if they approach it and say we have to run on early downs to sort of take pressure off of Burrow, I think that's going to be a bad choice, because I want Burrow taking multiple cracks at this defense per possession and not just one.
Yeah. Have we seen, like, in terms of Zach Taylor, I was thinking about it today. Like, I was trying to think back to a game. To me, it always seems like we only have 2 seasons of data for him, but it seems like when things get tighter, he tends to be more conservative. I don't have necessarily numbers around that, but is that, like, do you have anything on that from a numbers perspective that justifies it aside from last week?
Well, last week he certainly did that. And we've seen it other games. Against San Francisco, he was like that. Against Denver, he was like that. The only game where he really let it rip was the Kansas City Chiefs game in week 17, where they said, basically, we're not going to win this game unless we increase the variance and we throw the football a lot. But for the most part, he does try to run the football too much. And Joe Mixon this year, an interesting stat, he leads the NFL in yards gained on the ground on run plays that are not perfectly blocked. So he is a tough runner. But I unfortunately believe that leads to a lot of sins of commission, where basically the running back is a good player, so we're going to use him because he's good relative to when things are bad, and then so you opt into bad situations too much as opposed to throwing the football.
Do you think he's influenced at all with the familiarity that he has with McVay working under him for a couple of years? Like, is there like a risk that he tries to outsmart himself in a way to catch McVay off guard?
Well, I would hope. I mean, both guys did too, like Cam Akers and Sony Michel ran the ball too much for the Rams on early downs the last 3 games too. If I were Zach Taylor, I would try to lull my former boss into running the ball on early downs, because it's going to be hard for them to cover the Cooper Kupps of the world. And if the Rams opt into sort of like the Bengals version of offense, which is again run and then put your quarterback in a 3rd and long situation. That just plays to the Bengals' hands. Every single run to Cam Akers and Sony Michel is a winner for the Bengals.
I feel like this week matters more. We hear coaching familiarity every Super Bowl. I feel like there's something to it this year, because part of me thinks Taylor's kind of over his head within the matchup. But then again, we've seen McVay, like, this postseason. I feel like he's been a lot more run heavy, despite a lack of success than we've ever seen him from calling plays.
Okay. I mean, I'm just also now trying to work out, is this going to be a high scoring game? I can't work out if it's not. And this is where you guys are going to go absolutely one way or the other. And I'm going to feel like a bit of a muppet, but this is why you guys are the experts. I'm thinking if I'm on Pinnacle and I'm having a look at the odds, 49.5, right? Is it going to be over or under, for example? And you feel free to actually stretch the boundaries a little bit more, guys. Eric, is it going to be over or under 49.5? And also why? What are people looking out for when they're looking at high scoring or low scoring Super Bowl?
Yeah, I mean, if it's over the key number of 49, I'd probably go under. You see some places, I even think, depends upon the day, but I think some places are under 49 now at 48.5. I even saw 48 on another book. That's sort of where I would start to consider not betting under. Opened at 50, I would say. I mean, the stuff that Adam and I are just talking about, where both teams are sort of trying to shorten the game, trying to keep risky things. Like we talk about risk in a weird way, but like traditional football risk, which is throwing the ball too much and getting intercepted and stuff. If both coaches sort of like opt into that, neither coach is that like aggressive on 4th downs either. So you might see some punts, near midfield, which are always great for the under. So I would say it's probably under until that number gets to like 47.5 for me.
Okay. Nice. Adam, is that the way you see it? Surely with the risk involved though, Eric, that you talk about, and I know it's obviously a different risk to the traditional risk that you just mentioned, but surely that then does lend itself to a high scoring game as well. Just saying, if it is the Super Bowl as well, anything can happen, remember. So Adam, I'm not sure if you want to go down the same path as Eric. You probably do.
You're pushing me to make a case for the over, and I don't think I really have one, unless it's just a case where like both coaches go a little bit different than what we've seen them recently with their tendencies, and this just opens right up. But I still think that there's enough defensive skill in both secondaries that Cincinnati can either play a little bit softer and not allow those huge plays over the back. But on the other side, I think Ramsey can go a long way to negating some of the big individual plays that the Bengals benefit from. So I think the totals in the right neighborhood, certainly for points. I don't just see much value one way or the other.
Yeah. And in terms of markets, are there any others that provide value? I mean, are you looking at handicaps? Is that a good way for bettors to kind of get their head around stuff, Adam?
For me, this is probably a better Super Bowl to look at props and wait for those to be available than there is finding a lot of value in any of the alternates or the derivatives. We saw really early, maybe the ones that did have value initially, first quarter and first half under, but those were bet into place, I mean, within 20 to 30 minutes after open. So there wasn't much there in terms of the alternate handicap. Again, I think the side and the total are both really close to where the number should be. And in a game where there's just one game on the board, or in a week where there's one game on the board, like usually you find value in alternates on a busy week where there's a lot of movement and you're sort of catching some numbers that bookmakers have at the extremes. Not usually do you ever find that at Pinnacle, obviously one of the more efficient trading teams in the entire industry. But like you can look up and down the board, all the alternates right now are priced right in line with where they should be. And that's what comes with just having the one game of focus for not only Pinnacle, but every other bookmaker in the world. So you're not finding a lot of value. And I think it's really tough to have a projection within this game that's drastically different from the 4 and the 48.5 we're seeing.
Okay. Eric?
Yeah. To me, I think you have to look at props. I think the one that I really do like is Cam Akers under, 6, wherever you look in the market. That's the beauty of this too, as Adam said, like there's not going to be a book out there that's going to deviate from what you guys have because they're going to get sniped, relatively quickly. But props, you can see, 10-cent differences. You can see 3-yard differences all over the market. So there are some books that have Cam Akers 65.5 rushing yards, 64.5 rushing yards. I go under that just because, he's been a great story and coming back from an Achilles injury in a relative small amount of time, but he hasn't been effective in coming back. And I think there are two outs for people in this game, which is A, he still continues to play poorly, or the Rams decide to be more efficient offensively and go away from him completely. And in both those cases, you're likely to win that bet.
Yeah, I'm just looking at all the different prop bets. There's so many you could go at, isn't there? There's loads. But any kind of other interesting storylines that we've not picked up on? I mean, by the way, I bet there's no NFL podcasts in the world that have got 31 minutes in without mentioning Tom Brady. So, I mean, he's nothing to do with what we're looking at, but I think that's quite well done to us. I'll just give a little tip of the hat to that. But any of the storylines, we'll talk about Tom Brady at the end and just kind of get the numbers on him from your guys' perspective, actually, if you don't mind. But in terms of stuff that we've missed, Adam and Eric, that little nugget that we've not actually talked about thus far on the pod, feel free. Now is the time. The floor is open.
Well, pretty good handicap, but I think that obviously the defensive line of the Rams versus the offensive line of the Bengals is a big one. I think perhaps the situation for the Rams at both starting safety positions is one that they've kind of navigated around throughout the playoffs. I think it was a really good game from Weddle a week ago, surprisingly, but coming out of retirement there last minute. But against a 3 wide receiver dynamic threat like the Bengals have, I think that's an interesting discussion point, potentially, depending on the health and who ultimately starts back there for the Rams at safety. But it's a much bigger task for them to defend these 3 guys than what San Francisco was throwing at them deep down the middle of the field with Jimmy G behind center there. So it's that's another one I think is interesting. And then I like we kind of touched on it. I think just the trajectory of both teams coming into the Super Bowl could lead you to have kind of very different handicaps. Perhaps the Rams benefiting a bit from those 2 divisional opponents within the playoffs, making them look a little bit different from their offensive outputs in those games. But to me, it's it's the least interesting sort of Super Bowl we could have got from like a matchup perspective. The Niners would have had so many position groups would have created something really exciting, but this one's a bit tricky to like really get further into.
Yeah, I mean, you look in Joe Burrow, who we talked about, Jamar Chase, versus Matthew Stafford, Odell Beckham Jr., Cooper Kupp, others. It's not really the most inspiring thing in the world. Eric, are the storylines that kind of come to mind, and we'll talk MVP as well in a moment. So get your MVP hat on. But Eric, I'm kind of going to ask you just anything else first, and then Adam, get your MVP pick ready.
All right.
Yeah.
This game is just a game of stars. The Rams have 3 players who are the most valuable players in the NFL at their positions: Cooper Kupp, Jalen Ramsey, Aaron Donald. Right? You add Von Miller and Leonard Floyd into that mix. Matthew Stafford's a top 5 quarterback in the league in terms of WAR this year. It's just a game of stars. And so if you're the Bengals, you have to attack the weak parts of that team, right? That was always when you build a team of stars and moderate players, that's the weakness, right? Where the Bengals are much more, especially on the defensive side of the ball, a well spread out team. There really isn't a star on that defense, but there isn't really a terrible player on that defense either. And so that makes it an interesting, it's sort of contrasts in approaches between the two teams. But yeah, to me, like I said, I think the Akers under is a great play. I'm always going to bet Cooper Kupp overs because that is just what the Rams do, is they throw the ball to Cooper Kupp. But yeah, that's the storyline for me is, can the Bengals contain, the Rams offense and Cooper Kupp specifically the way that they did with the Chiefs offense in the second half?
Right, the time has come. Adam, you've had a bit of thinking time there, whilst Eric was giving us the insight into the stardust that the Rams possess against the Bengals. Very steady. I like it. Right, MVP, one name, hit me and tell me why.
Honestly, I haven't bet anything. I'm looking at the odds. It's always tough to avoid the winning QB getting it. Unfortunately, I think Donald's a bit short, like just based on the matchup. I think there's a potential where it's like a Von Miller repeat from a few years ago, but that numbers, I think, kind of assuming that if you're really going down and looking for potentially some value, if the Bengals eliminate Kupp, which is going to be difficult to do, but maybe they are able to bracket him and limited some of his production, maybe OBJ playing off of that around 30-1 could be something. He's kind of come on. He's not like running the most complex routes or the most dynamic, but he's really starting to be featured a little bit within the passing game. So that could be kind of the guy that benefits from maybe a little bit more attention on Kupp. So longer odds there, but maybe some value in that.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, I'm going to be a little bit boring. As Adam alluded to, Von Miller's the last defensive player to win the MVP, even though you've had some really good defensive performances in recent years. Last year's Bucs team, for example, was amazing, but defensive success is usually spread out between multiple players, and so usually it's hard to concentrate that. So the Bucs, for example, Tom Brady won the MVP last year, even though the story of the game is really how Tampa Bay's defense did. The last time the Rams were in a Super Bowl, the game was 13-3. So obviously the Patriots and the Rams defenses both played well. The MVP went to Julian Edelman because he had a great individual offensive performance in a 13-point effort for an offense. So, and to me, the only defensive player I'd bet on is Adam said. I think the number's a little short on Donald. So there's a ton of daylight between Matthew Stafford's odds, which are basically like even money or so, and the Rams odds, which are like minus 200. And then there's a decent amount of daylight between Joe Burrow's odds and the Bengals odds to win. And so I think, to me, it's just a cheaper money line bet on the team you want to win. And so that would be what I would go for. I kind of like Burrow more than I like Stafford, but so let's go with Burrow.
Nice. There we go. We've got some names there. Excellent stuff. And good reason as well behind it, even though you're right. And the man that you mentioned, who was the MVP last year, even though many people after the game were going, what, really? Was Tom Brady. And he's retired this week. I mean, you guys, you cover NFL, you're all over it. I mean, there's been so much said about it this week. So feel free to kind of keep it brief. but the game is going to miss him. But it was time, wasn't it, from your perspective? I've kind of read into this quite a lot, and I mean, 22 seasons, 7 Super Bowls, fair enough. But the game is a changing, Eric.
Yeah, it's interesting because like Tom Brady's going to screw up quarterback age curves mathematically forever because played well into his 40s and like did not have a bad season, right? Like there's, so in some sense it wasn't really time, but I could see why he retired. I mean, he was a beneficiary of the variance that we just talked about with 7 playoff teams. Now last year they still only played the 16 games, but there were 7 playoff seeds last year. They got through from the 5 seed. It was the first ever time that Brady won while not winning his own division. And then this year, they kind of became a prisoner of that situation. 17 games. They, there were no bye. They didn't get a bye, even though they got the 2 seed, which would have been a bye back when Brady was playing in New England. And they had to play all 17 games hard because they needed that last one for the 2 seed. And it probably wears on you. And I know it doesn't seem like a lot to play 2 extra games every year, but I can guarantee you that after 22 seasons, and knowing full well, and Brady's not an idiot, knowing full well how improbable it is to win 7 in the first place, I think that it's just a calculation of risk and reward for him at this point.
Give me your thoughts on Tom Brady. Was it time?
January 16th, 2011 was the last time that I felt joy as a football fan, not related to a betting outcome, because my beloved New York Jets put him on his back 5 times in the playoff win, 28-21, the Bart Scott game. Loved it. And that was just an absolute treat to watch him suffer against the Jets defensive line. But to me, it was time for him to retire about 15 years ago. He kind of tortured us within that division for the better part of 2 decades. So obviously the best to ever do it. But as a Jets fan, selfishly, I'm glad he can no longer come back and torture us anymore.
That Jets game reminded me of the Bengals game against the Chiefs in the second half, really, right? They rushed 3. Brady didn't have that many weapons, and I know the Chiefs are different, but they don't have a weapon after Hill or Kelsey, and it was just like, come and get us. And it was a brilliant defensive performance by Revis, Cromartie, and Bart Scott and all those guys.
He tried to beat us with Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis out of the backfield. Yeah. It wasn't working, but beyond Gronkowski was like Deion Branch, I think was.
They traded Moss that year, so they didn't have an outside threat. So that was
exactly.
Yep.
This is great. This is great. I you know what? Well done to us, by the way, for getting this far and without actually really mentioning Tom Brady. Nice words as well, gentlemen, from both kind of perspectives. Also, as well, on a serious note, it helps the Chiefs, this, doesn't it? It helps the Bucs, this, doesn't it? Because in many ways they have, time to think about who's going to replace him. He's not lingered around till March, April time. He's not sort of left them hanging. They now need to go out and get a quarterback, and they need to do it fairly quickly. But at least he's given them the time to do that. So I'm sure that was not in his mind when he was releasing that statement the other day. But it's worked out quite nicely for the Bucs, that, hasn't it?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of teams that need quarterbacks now, but I think unlike the Packers, unlike the Vikings, unlike Cleveland and teams that are likely going to move on from their starters, they at least know, probably a month in advance. So I do think that helps them a lot. The issue is obviously the downgrade from Brady is still so bad that any timing differential is still going to be a rough go of it for them. Yeah.
Is that the way you see it, Adam? I mean, it is. Of course, it's the biggest downgrade probably in sports history, whoever they end up getting.
Yeah, it's there. If they find someone, that's great, but there's a big hole to fill now.
Yeah, it's not good. Not good. Gents, thanks so much for joining us and giving us your insight into what promises to be, well, I was going to say a brilliant Super Bowl. It's not going to be, is it? Thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate it. Adam as well. Really good debut as well. Adam Chernoff, senior NFL strategist at Covers, and also, as ever, mainstay all the way through the season, Eric Eager as well. Thanks for the season, Eric, and we'll hopefully link up again next season. We'll see what it brings from PFF data. experts. Thanks so much, guys, and we'll take it. Well, we'll speak again soon. We'll see how the Super Bowl pans out. And thanks for listening.